quarter of a century since these shots were fired, the shots that killed President Kennedy. The official murder investigation, the Warren Commission report, hasn't stood the test of time. This dispatch tries to answer the great unanswered questions. Who killed Kennedy, and how was the truth concealed? The search was a labour of love for producer Chris Plumley, lasting many years. And for musicians and video makers Godley and Cream, it was the chance to direct their first documentary. The answers shouldn't have had to wait for so long since that day in Dallas, the day the dream died.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a press report over the wires. We hope that it is unconfirmed, but we have to doubt it, that the President of the United States has been the victim of an assassination.
25 years ago, we all watched these scenes in shock as the body of the assassinated president was taken to Washington. And we asked why. Why did he have to die? Why did the dream have to end? We never got any satisfactory answers, for one simple reason. We were asking the wrong questions. Over the years, new evidence has been discovered. Some of it has only become available as a result of the Freedom of Information Act, and now at last we know the questions that should have been asked. Question 1. Our evidence points to an inescapable conclusion. This casket was empty. The question is why? Question 2. Lyndon B. Johnson. What did this man stand to gain from the death of President Kennedy? Question 3. Who was this man? Question 4. Why did all these witnesses have to die? Question 5. Why was Lee Harvey Oswald arrested so quickly?
I've not been charged with that.
Question 6. Who set Jack Ruby up to kill Oswald? Question 7. Why was it necessary to alter Kennedy's body before the official autopsy in Washington? Question 8. Why did the Dallas doctors change their testimony the very next day? Question 9. Why was Kennedy's brain missing at the autopsy in Washington? Question 10. Why did the Warren Commission deceive the world? Good evening. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, and for 1,000 days, the most powerful man in the Western world. Those days of the early 60s are still, for many, a golden era, a time when the most charismatic leader of post-war years turned the White House into Camelot. During the intervening years, we have witnessed an uninterrupted flow of speculation about the findings of the Warren Commission and their official version of events surrounding the assassination. But to understand what really happened and the political climate that allowed it to happen, we must first look at Kennedy himself and the changing world in which he lived.
As I travel around Texas.
He was the first president to come to terms with the television age, but he had problems at home.
Some merchant happens to have Polish ham in his shop. Saying he's unpatriotic doesn't seem to me to be a great contribution in the fight against communism.
On the international front, the threat of atomic war was ever present. The nuclear arms race was at fever pitch, and Kennedy and Soviet leader Khrushchev fought a battle of wits that brought the world closer to destruction than at any stage in history.
Each increase of tension has produced an increase of arms. Each increase of arms has produced an increase of tension.
But I have a dream.
Civil rights was a pressing issue.
My 4 little children, will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Cuba, communism and Castro were a constant source of tension, but the world stage was Kennedy's.
In the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
The youngest ever president and his family brought Hollywood style and glamour to the White House. Kennedy was the new face of America, a man who appeared to embody the promise of a better future, a man for whom re-election in 1964 was all but guaranteed.
More than 3 years, I've spoken about the new frontier. This is not a partisan term, and it's not the exclusive property of Republicans or Democrats. It refers instead to this nation's place in history.
The campaign trail led to Texas, a crucial state for the Democrats and one that demanded a high profile.
Traveling with the presidential party are Vice President and Mrs. Johnson and Texas Governor John Connally. Friday morning, 11 o'clock. The presidential jet leaves Fort Worth for the short flight to Dallas.
Really, I don't anticipate any violence.
Friday morning, 11:37. The president's jet lands at the Dallas airport, Love Field.
Kennedy's visit to Dallas was part of the normal political round, but Dallas was far from a normal city. It was acknowledged as one of the country's breeding grounds for ultra-right-wing causes.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the trademark.
Every rule in the Secret Service book had been broken. The president and vice president should not have appeared together. The open-topped presidential limousine should not have been the lead vehicle and should have been traveling faster. These are the complete findings of the Warren Commission, the official version of events surrounding the death of the president. The commission had been set up soon after the assassination by Lyndon Johnson, and its timely publication in October 1964, just before the presidential election, was intended to show that the new president had done all in his power to discover the truth. And on the face of it, he had. These 26 volumes were greeted as the most diligent and painstaking research possible, but they were almost impossible to read. The compilers didn't provide an index, and it wasn't until later when a remarkable lady called Sylvia Marr, working independently, indexed all the evidence. Only then could the findings be properly understood. How was the president killed?
The shots which killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally were fired from the 6th floor window at the southeast corner of the Texas School Book Depository. The weight of the evidence indicates that there were 3 shots fired.
That footage was taken by amateur cameraman Abraham Zabruda. It became the Bible of the assassination, and there can hardly be anyone who has never seen it before. But what no one has seen until today are those pictures complete with soundtrack, and it's thanks to the work of another remarkable woman. Mary Farrell dedicated her life to tracking down anything to do with the assassination. With Gary Mack and Robert Groden, she discovered a dictabelt recording. A police outrider had sent a signal throughout the shooting. Electronic enhancement revealed the shots. Eventually, she managed to persuade her senator to reopen the inquiry into the assassination, and the recording was authenticated. Now we can hear and see exactly what happened. We can hear the sound of 5 shots and see the results of 6.
The weight of the evidence indicates that there were 3 shots fired.
But there were 6 shots fired. Where did those shots go?
This time, I says, I felt something sting me on the face.
Says, I'm standing down there. I said, just staying. And Walters looked at me and says, yes, says, you got blood on your cheek. He says, where were you standing? And I says, well, down by the underpass. So we started walking down there. And when Walters got about, I'd say 10 feet away, he says, look there on the curb, there was a very visible mark on the curb where a bullet had struck. Either a fragment of the bullet or a piece of the concrete. It flew up and scratched my face.
This is an aerial view of Dealey Plaza. James Tague was standing here, close to the Triple Lane underpass. He was hit either by the ricocheting bullet or by fragments of a curbstone close by. Tague went to the CIA and the FBI and told them how he'd been hit. He was told he would be called before the Warren Commission, but his evidence was dismissed. The bullet that injured him would have added one too many to their list.
The weight of the evidence indicates that there were 3 shots fired.
On an optically enhanced version of Zapruder's film, we can clearly see the president grasping at his throat. It's a clear indication that the bullet was fired from the front. Indeed, doctors in Dallas, who were the first to examine Kennedy, described the injuries to the throat as a front entry wound.
There is no credible evidence that the shots were fired from the triple underpass ahead of the motorcade or from any other location.
That film was shot by another amateur cameraman, Orville Nix, who was standing on the opposite side of the road to Abraham Zapruder. The remarkable thing about the Nix film is that without realizing it, he'd captured the gunman on camera. And it's only with the latest image-enhancing techniques that we can reveal the previously undetected contents of his film. Clearly, the presidential limousine is in the foreground, behind the grassy knoll on which Zapruder is standing. And to the left of the monument, at the top of the knoll, a figure apparently in a firing position, close to an estate car. Comparisons with another amateur film shot seconds after the assassination reveal that the man and the car have gone. In these crucial frames, Nix had captured the man who fired that second shot into Kennedy's throat.
There is no question in the mind of any member of the commission that all the shots which caused the president's and Governor Connolly's wounds were fired from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository.
We all four seen about the same thing. As the shot, the smoke came from behind the hedge on north side of the plaza, and a motorcycle policeman dropped his motorcycle in the street with his gun in his hand and run up the embankment to the hedge.
Witnesses at the scene of the assassination saw a rifle being fired from the 6th floor window of the depository building, and some witnesses saw a rifle in the window immediately after the shots were fired.
The third shot was not fired from the grassy knoll. Whether it was fired by Lee Harvey Oswald from here, on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, is open to speculation. But what we do know is that it was fired from behind. It hit the president in the small of his back, 5 3/4 inches below the neckline. The fourth bullet, and the first time that Governor Connolly is hit. This shot was fired simultaneously with the third.
There is very persuasive evidence from the experts to indicate that the same bullet which pierced the president's throat also caused Governor Connolly's wounds.
No, that one commission is in error on that, because I was an eyewitness to that, and I know same bullet that hit President Kennedy did not hit Governor Connolly.
In fact, that fourth bullet, again shot from behind the presidential limousine, was fired approximately 2 seconds after Kennedy was hit in the throat. And as we'll hear later, one of the experts the commission didn't manage to convince was Governor Connolly himself.
I don't know who was hit first, but the president jumped up in his seat. And then as the cart got directly in front of us, well, a gunshot apparently from behind us hit the president in the side of the temple.
Do you think the shot came from up on top of the viaduct toward the president? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And not on the viaduct itself, but up on top of the hill, a little mound of ground there, the garden.
The fifth bullet, and the shot that killed Kennedy. We're told that this violent throwback of the head was a muscular spasm from a rear shot. In fact, the bullet was fired by the man on the grassy knoll and struck him in the right temple.
The president was struck a second time by a bullet which entered the right rear portion of his head, causing a massive and fatal wound.
Wrong on all counts. As we've seen, the bullet entered the front of his head, and this fatal bullet, the fifth to be fired, was the third to hit the president. The sixth shot came from behind. This is the bullet that injured Governor Connolly, hitting him in the wrist. It was fired 0.6 of a second after the fifth. We have now accounted for 6 shots. We know where they were fired from, and we know their effect. This is already double the number of shots claimed by the Warren Commission, but there were perhaps even more. Journalist Richard Dugman spotted a police officer and a deputy sheriff. An agent joins them. He removes a bullet and pockets it. The opposite end of the 6th floor of the depository, 15 seconds after the assassination. Who is this man? And what more can Zapruder reveal? As he pans to follow the speeding limousine, he captures an image of the back of a man's head. Is this another view of the gunman on the grassy knoll? As the presidential entourage raced to Parkland's Memorial Hospital, the crowds made straight for the grassy knoll, where they'd seen or heard the fatal shots coming from.
The hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway, several police officers are rushing up the hill.
Who killed President Kennedy?
The shots which killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connolly were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald.
Why Oswald?
Witnesses at the scene of the assassination saw a rifle being fired from the 6th floor window of the depository building, and some witnesses saw a rifle in the window immediately after the shots were fired.
What ties Oswald to the rifle?
The Mannlicher Carcano 6.5 millimeter Italian rifle from which the shots were fired was owned by and in the possession of Oswald.
I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
If one was asked to look for the perfect individual to assassinate the President of the United States, Lee Harvey Oswald fitted the bill spot on, down to the colour of his shoes. A self-confessed Marxist, he'd left the US Marines and defected to Russia in 1959. He returned to America in 1961 with a Russian wife and child. As far as the Warren Commission were concerned, his background was enough to convict him. Why did Oswald do it?
Clues to Oswald's motives can be found in his family history, his education or lack of it, his acts, his writings, and the recollections of those who had close contacts with him throughout his life.
Whether Oswald was guilty or not is, as we now know, not the question we should have been asking. 6 shots were fired that day, and the Commission only tied Oswald to 3 spent cartridges. The Commission was satisfied with the evidence that the Dallas police had named him as a suspect on the basis that he was the only employee missing from the book depository. In fact, the roll call showed several employees to be missing. They were also satisfied that Oswald's palm print had been found on the rifle discovered in the depository. What they did not explain was why the print was found only after Oswald had died, even though the rifle had been minutely examined by the FBI and the Dallas police for 4 days and had revealed no prints.
Chief, did the FBI or your department have him under surveillance prior to yesterday?
No, sir, we didn't have knowledge that he was in the city.
Did the FBI?
I understand that they did know he was here and had interviewed him a week or 2 ago. I want to correct anything that might have been misinterpreted or misunderstood, and that is regarding information that the FBI might have had about this man. I do not know if and when the FBI has interviewed this man. The FBI is under no obligation to come to us with any information concerning anyone. They have cooperated with us in the past 100%.
Could Oswald have done it?
Based on the testimony of the experts and their analysis of films of the assassination, the Commission has concluded that a rifleman of Lee Harvey Oswald's capabilities could have fired the shots from the rifle used in the assassination within the elapsed time of the shooting.
The Mannlicher Carcano, found after the assassination in the book depository, is a single-action breech-loading rifle. A spent cartridge has to be ejected, a fresh round loaded, and the rifle re-aimed. In the hands of an expert, it is impossible to aim and fire at a moving target the 3 shots in the 5.7 seconds the Commission claimed had elapsed. But was Oswald a marksman?
The Commission has concluded further that Oswald possessed the capability with a rifle which enabled him to commit the assassination.
That's certainly not the view of Nelson Delgado, with whom Oswald had served in the Marines.
As far as I knew, Oswald was a very poor shot.
So Oswald was a lousy shot, and the weapon it was claimed he had used was hardly ideal for an assassin. It was a cheap mail-order job, an old Italian design that had the reputation of being a humanitarian weapon, since it was so unlikely to harm anyone. The Commission were hell-bent on sticking to Oswald, and nothing but nothing could shake them. Not even perhaps the most ludicrous theory of all. How did Oswald achieve so much with just 3 bullets?
There is very persuasive evidence from the experts to indicate that the same bullet which pierced the president's throat also caused Governor Connolly's wounds.
This is very hard to believe when one sees the condition of a bullet that has only caused a wrist wound. However, this bullet, Commission Exhibit 399, known as the magic bullet, was magical enough to remain almost intact after all its work and present itself lying loose on Governor Connolly's stretcher at Parkland's Memorial Hospital. But let's take a closer look at what this bullet was supposed to have done. Oswald, say the Commission, was on the 6th floor of the depository building. He fired a shot which, according to them, went through the back of Kennedy's neck, exited from his throat, and then changed course to find its way into the right side of Governor Connolly's back, exit below his right nipple, hit his right wrist, and end up embedded in his left thigh. Improbable? Impossible? But if you can stretch your mind to believe that, there's one other factor to be taken into account. Governor Connolly was hit 2 seconds after the president was hit in the throat. In the Zapruder film, we see Kennedy grasp at his throat. At this time, the governor is still waving to the crowds. In real time, it's 2 seconds later when he's hit, and his reactions are obvious. But we don't even have to believe our own eyes. Governor Connolly himself posed the Commission the unanswerable question.
Unquestionably, when the first shot was fired, I recognized it as a shot. I thought of nothing else but that it was a rifle shot. I turned to my right. I had time to think. I had time to react. And I turned to my right to look back over my right shoulder to see if I could see anything unusual, and particularly to see if I could catch him out of the corner of my eye. Because I immediately thought... Him, you mean the president? The president. Because I immediately thought of an assassination attempt. The moment I heard the shot, I didn't see anything except just the general blur of waving, of people moving. Nothing really unusual. I did not see the president out of the corner of my eye, and I was in the process of turning back to look over my left shoulder. And had about come to the point where I was looking straight forward again when I felt the impact of the bullet that hit me. But I know I wasn't hit with the first shot. And then I was hit. And I know I wasn't hit with the third shot. That much I'm absolutely sure of.
And there's one further puzzle surrounding Connolly's injuries and that magic bullet. After it had been officially announced that the president was dead, the doctors at Parkland's Memorial Hospital in Dallas held a press conference. During the conference, they were asked about Connolly's condition.
They're asking now if a bullet was found in his leg.
The bullet is in the leg. It hasn't been removed. This is a very insignificant factor, though. It will be removed. Left eye.
Quite clearly, they had yet to operate on the governor, and a bullet was still lodged in his thigh. That bullet has never been accounted for. What were the injuries to the president?
President Kennedy was first struck by a bullet which entered at the back of his neck and exited through the lower front portion of his neck, causing a wound which would not necessarily have been lethal. The president was struck a second time by a bullet which entered the right rear portion of his head, causing a massive and fatal wound.
Those wounds, that tied in so neatly with the single rear assassin theory, were supposed to be the unanimous findings of the Dallas doctors and the official autopsy in Washington. Unfortunately, the Commission ignored or overlooked that very first press conference held by the Dallas doctors. This is a transcript of their descriptions of the injuries to the President. Dr. Malcolm Perry was the attending surgeon. He told the press,
"The neck wound, as visible on the patient, revealed a bullet hole almost in the midline."
Question, would you demonstrate?
"In the lower portion of the neck, in front."
Question, below the Adam's apple?
"Below the Adam's apple."
Question, which way was the bullet coming on the neck wound? At him?
At him.
Later in the press conference, Perry reiterated that point.
"The wound appeared to be an entrance wound in the front of the throat. Yes, that is correct."
After that press conference, there was a violent row between the Secret Service men and Texas state officials about who had jurisdiction over the President's body. It ended with the body being forcibly removed and taken in a massive funeral casket to Love Field Airport. On board Air Force One, Jackie Kennedy refused to leave her husband's coffin, and it was only when Lyndon Johnson announced that he was going to be sworn in as the new president that she was persuaded to go to the makeshift ceremony. The body was left unattended for 20 minutes, and all evidence points to a gruesome and clumsy attempt at that time to alter the body, to make the wounds consistent with the rear assassin theory. In a moment I'll describe what was done, but first, the casket we all watched being unloaded in Washington no longer contained the body of the President. His body had been transferred to a standard issue military grey metal coffin. It was driven at high speed to the rear of the hospital and taken to the mortuary.
I helped put President Kennedy's body in a bronze ceremonial casket on November 22nd, 1963 at Parkland Memorial Hospital.
That evening at approximately 8 o'clock, the body arrived in a gray metal casket.
It was a light bronze, or a dark bronze coffin with lighter bronze handles on it. It was a very nice, expensive type casket.
It was a very plain casket, and when I say plain, I mean it was pinkish gray. It had pink and gray on the sides. There was nothing fancy about it as far as being bronze. It wasn't bronze.
I would venture to say it weighed close to 1,000 pounds.
Oh, maybe 60 pounds.
They had him wrapped in sheets at the time. And when we picked him up to put him in there, he was still dripping quite a bit of blood from the wound in the back of his head, whatever caused it. We put some more sheets in a mattress liner, plastic mattress liner inside the coffin to soak up this blood that was dripping, you know. We went ahead and put him in the coffin and closed the lid.
We opened the whole casket up, and there was a gray body bag, zipped shut. We unzipped the body bag, and the President's body was lifted out of the body bag. He's completely naked except for a sheet wrapped around his head, a bloody sheet.
The autopsy was led by a naval pathologist, Commander James Hughes. He and the others present were not qualified forensic pathologists and were judged by the Congressional Assassinations Committee to have had insufficient training and experience to evaluate a death from gunshot wounds. We've already heard their findings. According to them, the President had been hit twice from behind. One bullet had entered the back of his neck and exited from his throat. The other had blown in the right rear of his skull. But remember what the Dallas doctors said at the press conference. First, the throat wound, a front entry in their view, but now, according to the autopsy in Washington, an exit wound. The shot in the back, 5 3/4 inches below the neckline in Dallas, now placed in the back of the neck in Washington to tie in with the throat wound. But most crucial of all, the gunshot to the right front temple that was undoubtedly the fatal shot. In Dallas, the exit wound had been described as egg-shaped, but Humes and his colleagues now chose to describe it as looking like this. FBI agents present at the autopsy described the body as appearing to have undergone surgery. Surgery that we know did not take place in Dallas. A star-shaped incision had been made on top of the skull sometime between Dallas and Washington. And most shocking of all, when Humes performed his autopsy in Washington, the President's brain had been removed before any examination was possible.
As I recollect, when we got the last part of the sheet off, there was just a gasp to the room, and I looked down and I said to myself, my God, there's no brain. It's all gone.
I could fit both of my hands right inside the skull cavity.
It was jagged opening all the way through the head.
And I made the comment to Reed, my God, look at the size of this hole.
We can only speculate that the brain, which has the consistency of plasticine and allows you to follow the trajectory of bullet wounds, would have proven an insurmountable obstacle to the autopsy findings. What we don't need to speculate on is one piece of evidence recorded by the Warren Commission, but never properly explained. During the autopsy, a bullet was removed from the body and handed to FBI agents Siebert and O'Neill. They signed this document accepting responsibility for it. The bullet was never seen again. Whether it was the same caliber as the bullet found on the stretcher in Dallas and could be linked to Oswald will have to remain unanswered.
Yeah, he's got to be here. There he is. There he is. There he comes.
Now the prisoner wearing a change from his t-shirt.
On November the 24th, Oswald was led out of Dallas Police Headquarters en route to the county jail. Jack Ruby was waiting for him.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
Did Ruby act alone?
There is no evidence to support the rumor that Ruby may have been assisted by any members of the Dallas Police Department in the killing of Oswald.
Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin. There was no doubt in the Commission's view about that. It followed that Ruby also had to be a lone killer. The Commission painted a picture of Ruby as a sleazy nightclub owner, always on the lookout for publicity, yet somebody virtually unknown to the Dallas police force and government agencies.
We have 1,200 men in our department, and we had each man to submit a report regarding his knowledge or acquaintance with Jack Ruby. Less than 50 men even knew Jack Ruby, and less than a dozen had ever been in his place of business.
The truth about Ruby, however, is very different. Ruby had been on the fringes of organized crime all his life. He'd been a numbers runner for Al Capone's cousin in Chicago and had moved up the league, organizing new sections of Mafia-controlled unions. His nightclub in Dallas was a strip joint and a stopping-off place for members of the mob who were passing through. Most important of all, the club was a stone's throw from the Dallas police headquarters, and members of the force always received a special welcome.
Yes, in fact, Jack told me point blank, he said, Nancy, if you ever, he said, intentionally or unintentionally, charge a Dallas police officer, he said, you might as well go look for another job. He said, don't offend them, cater to them, talk with them, even if you ignore the other customers. Bend over backwards to be nice to them.
I believe there was 4 men in our department that we were able to determine had been there socially.
There were almost 1,200 police officers in Dallas in 1963. Would you say Ruby knew 600 of them?
Oh, easily.
We have not been able to find anyone of our men who saw and recognized Ruby at the time of this transfer.
Do I believe that you recognize this man after the capture?
Yes, sir. Did you recognize him when he came through?
Yes, I have known Jack Ruby for a number of years, and I recognized him just as soon as he emerged from the crowd.
Ruby was convicted of murder. Officially, he acted alone. In the mayhem that followed the 6 shots in Dealey Plaza, the crowds raced up the grassy knoll. About 400 people lined both sides of Elm Street. The Warren Commission took testimony from 259. 90 were asked where they thought the shots came from. 58 said the grassy knoll. All 58 were dismissed on the grounds that their recollections were mistaken. One of those witnesses, Orville Nix, had actually recorded the man responsible for those shots on film. But who was he? French film director Jean-Michel Chalier obtained a copy of the film from Orville Nix's son. It had been made before Nix had handed the original to the FBI, and it proves to be unlike any version seen before. Details that had been obscured in the official copies now became clear. Chalier focused on the previously blurred figure on the grassy knoll. With optical enhancement, an unmistakable image appears. Chalier had a clear picture of a man with a rifle in a firing position. There has been a great deal of speculation about the identity of the man on the grassy knoll. However, the weight of all the circumstantial evidence points to one man. His name, David Ferry. Ferry was a highly skilled pilot. He'd flown guns into Cuba for the CIA and piloted a plane bringing Mafia chief Carlos Marcello illegally into the United States. Ferry knew both Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby.
The night before the assassination, Ferry stayed in a hotel in Galveston. Records showed that Jack Ruby called that hotel that evening, and most intriguingly, when Oswald was arrested, Ferry's library card was found in his possession.
Ferry's presence in Dallas on the day of the assassination has subsequently been verified by two gay friends with whom he lived in New Orleans. But apart from all the circumstantial connections with the main players, one piece of evidence is compelling. For a hitman, Ferry had one peculiar disadvantage. His appearance was, to say the least, striking.
Ferry suffered from alopecia, a loss of all body hair. He wore bright red mohair wigs and daubed on grease paint eyebrows. One witness who was standing on top of the Triple Lane underpass described a bizarre figure that fits his description.
Acquaintances described him as having the look of a large and sad clown. Such a figure would be hard to miss. Unfortunately, Ferry will never be properly questioned.
He'd been subpoenaed to appear before an inquiry led by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison.
To protect him from the press, Garrison had installed him in the Fontainebleau Hotel in New Orleans. A matter of hours before he was due to appear in court, Ferry was found dead. The coroner's verdict, despite two typewritten suicide notes found in his home, was that he died of natural causes. Ferry's death, so close to being questioned, is suspicious. But Ferry is just another name in an extraordinary list of people who have died in mysterious circumstances. Of witnesses to the assassination, or events intimately involved with it, so far at least 32 people have died in suicides, bizarre accidents, or shootings. Who gained by Kennedy's death?
In its entire investigation, the Commission has found no evidence of conspiracy, subversion, or disloyalty to the U.S. government by any federal, state, or local official.
So many people stood to gain from Kennedy's death, it adds up to an almost obscene list. The obvious winners were the Mafia, who had been suffering at the hands of JFK and his brother Bobby, the Attorney General. With JFK gone, Bobby had lost his power base. Less obvious than the Mafia is another group who stood to gain. A few days before the assassination, Kennedy had given orders for a gradual withdrawal from Vietnam with the reduction of the 16,000 men stationed there.
Those orders were never carried out, and we all know what was to happen in Vietnam for the rest of the decade. The arms industry is the largest profit-making machine in America.
The most tantalizing clue as to who really stood to gain comes from a piece of film never shown before. It's a short clip featuring Jack Ruby in 1967 as he was seeking leave to appeal against his conviction for the murder of Oswald. He's asked what he can say about the assassination.
When I mentioned about Adlai Stevens, if he was vice president, there would never have been an assassination of our beloved President Kennedy. Well, the answer is the man in office now. When I mentioned about Adlai Stevens, if he was vice president, there would never have been an assassination of our beloved President Kennedy. Well, the answer is the man in office now.
Well, the answer is the man in office now. The man in office then was Lyndon B. Johnson. Within weeks of that interview, Ruby died of previously undetected cancer. The woman who shot the film, like so many others we've seen, committed suicide. Virtually all the evidence you have heard in this program is contained, or rather buried, in the findings of the Warren Commission. 10 years ago, only 1 in 10 Americans still believed that the report and its summary held the true facts behind the assassination. Today, that number must be even less. But the official version of events is still that one man, Lee Harvey Oswald, assassinated President Kennedy, and that he fired 3 shots that day in Dealey Plaza.
Well, I've not been charged with that.
The list of questions that we have already posed and answered here is only the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more. Why did autopsy surgeon James Humes destroy all his notes taken during the examination of Kennedy? How could Lee Harvey Oswald have been 5 feet 7 inches tall in the Marines and 5 feet 10 at his autopsy? Why did Jack Ruby beg Earl Warren to take him out of Dallas to testify, a request that was turned down? Why was Governor Connolly's jacket cleaned and pressed before undergoing analysis?
Why did Ruby call Ferry at his hotel the night before the assassination? Who called Ruby in the cafe opposite the Dallas police headquarters 2 minutes before he shot Oswald? Why were there so many Lee Harvey Oswald lookalikes in the Dallas area in the days leading up to the assassination? How did Oswald obtain a discharge from the Marines so easily? Why did a man standing close to the motorcade open up his umbrella during the shooting? Why was a Dallas police officer shown a Secret Service badge? Why did Lyndon B. Johnson give instructions that certain documents relating to the assassination should not be released in our lifetime?